This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. World leaders gather at the G20 in Argentina. But for all the meetings, it's this handshake which may say the most. A major earthquake strikes near Anchorage, Alaska, causing extensive damage to homes, offices and infrastructure. And meet the plant doctor. Thanks to information from space, he's helping farms in Africa to thrive. Welcome to World News America. The gathering of the G20 is usually a tale of meetings had and deals done. But today, the focus fell largely on the gatherings which didn't take place. President Trump had called off his talks with Vladimir Putin and already said he wouldn't be meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But those two leaders didn't seem too upset as they greeted each other with a warm handshake. From the site of the summit in Buenos Aires, the BBC's North America editor John Sopel reports.
In his brief time on the world stage, Donald Trump has been seen as the disruptor-in-chief. But not this time round. The G20 is a chance for world leaders to discuss matters of mutual interest. Speed dating for the ruling class, if you like. But after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, they would quite like to be able to cold shoulder the Saudi leader Mohammed bin Salman. The problem is they love his lucrative defence contracts and his country's oil more. He and Donald Trump exchanged pleasantries, but had no meeting. Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, looked overjoyed to see him, high fives all round. Theresa May had a sit-down with him where she raised the murder of the Saudi journalist and demanded full transparency in the investigation. And President Macron of France had this slightly tense exchange. Donald Trump had been due to sit down with Vladimir Putin, but the president cancelled the meeting over the seizing of 3 Ukrainian vessels. The Russian leader stares ahead impassively as his American counterpart walks past.
On the basis of what took place with respect to the ships and the sailors, that was the sole reason.
But where the US president still leaves other world leaders deeply uneasy is over his protectionist, America First attitudes towards trade.
This has been a battle.
But today the signing of a new trade agreement between Mexico, the US and Canada.
The USMCA is the largest, most significant, modern and balanced trade agreement in history. All of our countries will benefit greatly. It is probably the largest trade deal ever made also.
Though it brought this broadside from the Canadian Prime Minister.
Make no mistake, we will stand up for our workers and fight for their families and their communities. And Donald, it's all the more reason why we need to keep working to remove the tariffs on steel and aluminum between our countries.
The key meeting of this G20 will take place tomorrow evening, when most of the other world leaders are already on their way home. With Donald Trump threatening further tariffs against the Chinese, his meeting with President Xi is absolutely critical. It's no exaggeration that the future direction of the global economy could be decided at their meeting.
The protesters on the streets of the capital this afternoon are demanding a fairer world and action on climate change. But Donald Trump marches to another beat, much more concerned about American business and American exports. And few people hold out much hope of a dramatic breakthrough with the Chinese. John Sopel, BBC News, Buenos Aires.
And joining me now is PJ Crowley, who served as State Department spokesperson during the Obama administration and is the author of The Red Line. Great to have you with us, PJ Crowley. Pictures speak 1,000 words at G20 summits. Perhaps the most striking are those images, that high five or handshake between Mohammed bin Salman and Vladimir Putin, 2 people accused of serious human rights abuses. What did you make of that?
I'm certainly not surprised that Putin would be one of the people, to offer a hand, literally, to the Crown Prince. Sure, they have a lot to compare. The challenge of plausible deniability, both with the Khashoggi case and with the Skripal case. I'm sure quietly the former intelligence operative is secretly admiring of how the Crown Prince has moved against some of his political opponents.
And those two leaders did not notably meet with Donald Trump. Let's start with Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump called off a planned meeting with him over the issue of Ukraine. How effective will that be in terms of applying pressure?
Well, certainly coming on the heels of Helsinki, the White House recognized that it couldn't afford another public relations disaster, given what happened in Ukraine in recent days. Whether the president got to the right point through the right logic, it was the right decision.
A lot of anticipation about the interaction as well that the president would have with the Crown Prince. He said they didn't meet, they had no discussions, but exchanged pleasantries. How significant was that?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. The Crown Prince has been damaged by this. How Saudi Arabia responds is going to be very, very significant. They do, in fact, as President Macron said, they have to be far more transparent about what happened. The Crown Prince, I think, will have to own this in some fashion if he's going to be credibly seen as a reformer going forward.
You talked about meetings that did not happen, but President Trump has a crucial meeting with the president of China, all about trade. Do you think the trade war is going to escalate, or do you think it will dampen?
I don't think that Donald Trump even knows how he's going to play this yet. I think the most likely scenario would be that there's an agreement in principle that leads to some sort of a follow-on negotiation. I agree with John Sopel. I don't think there's going to be a breakthrough tomorrow, but I think there should be a pledge, there could be a pledge that the trade war will not intensify, and that, based on follow-on negotiations, the president will hold his fire in terms of further tariffs.
PJ Crowley, thanks very much for joining us.
A pleasure.
Now, for more on how everything is playing out on the ground in Buenos Aires, I can speak to my colleague Tim Wilcox, who is there for us now. Tim, G20s always provide awkward moments, but how much more tense do you think things are this time round?
Well, it's difficult to say, Rajini. I'm not even sure if there's going to be a joint communique tomorrow, like what happened just a few weeks ago at the APEC conference. That's what we're hearing from one Argentine source here. And really, it has been a difficult, acrimonious day, especially for the hosts, who've got their own domestic internal economic problems here as well. And I'm standing at the moment, actually, on the terrace of the Chilean embassy here in Argentina. I've just been speaking to the Chilean President, Sebastián Piñera, and I asked him about that. And he said, well, look, if we don't get a communique here, this will have been a failure. He was pretty strong on that. Regarding the Saudi Crown Prince, for example, I said, was Mohammed bin Salman, was he shunned, was he ostracized? And he said, no, I shook his hand, we just said hi and moved on. I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, just on the Saudi issue and the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, made it very clear that she expected there to be a transparent investigation. She expected the Saudi authorities to work with the Turkish authorities on this as well, and to bring those responsible to justice, which is, of course, what Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president, has been calling for as well. John Sopel had that little clip of that rather difficult meeting between Emmanuel Macron of France and the Saudi Crown Prince. And just when you look at what was said, Emmanuel Macron said, as he was speaking to him, the Crown Prince smiling as if, it was just a genial conversation. But Macron actually said, I'm worried. I told you, you never listened to me. It was an opportunity for you. And MBS, the Crown Prince, said, I can take it. Looking at the dinner tomorrow night, though, with President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, certainly the Chinese are pushing for an end to this trade war before those increased tariffs come in on January the 1st. But I don't think there's much prospect of that happening, certainly not tomorrow. It'll be very surprising, I think, if anything, if there is a breakthrough on that front.
Tim Wilcox in Buenos Aires, thank you. Next, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake has struck near Anchorage, Alaska, causing extensive damage and multiple aftershocks. Some roads have collapsed and many structures couldn't sustain the major tremor. They're still assessing the situation, but so far there's no word of casualties, as the BBC's James Cook reports.
Alaskans are used to earthquakes, but sometimes you need luck on your side too.
Holy smoke.
This quake struck at 8:30 in the morning.
Can you get out of there?
Buckling roads and leaving this car stranded, but safe. Inside, there was confusion. Earthquake drills are all very well, but reality can be quite different.
Yeah.
Some pupils were already at school. This boy's instinct was to start filming as the children took cover.
There are TVs on the ground. You can see this right here.
The first quake caused damage inside buildings, forcing all of the local TV stations off the air. Many people had returned to their offices when a powerful aftershock sent them scrambling out again. Scientists calculated that the epicenter of the first, most powerful tremor was under an inlet north of Anchorage and issued a tsunami warning. President Trump responded on Twitter, saying that the great people of Alaska had been hit hard by a big one. He promised that the federal government will spare no expense in its response. Every year, thousands of earthquakes shake Alaska. The full extent of the damage from this one is not yet clear, but it was far bigger than most, rattling even the resilient people of the frozen north. James Cook, BBC News.
And for more on the science behind this quake, I spoke a brief while ago with theoretical physicist Michio Kaku. Professor Kaku, it's great to have you with us. How common are earthquakes in that part of the world?
Well, first of all, I think we dodged the bullet on this one. This was not the big one. The big one happened in 1964. That was a 9.2 earthquake. This was a 7.0, which takes place somewhere around the Earth once a month. So once a month, there is a 7.0 earthquake somewhere on the planet Earth. But the bad news is, however, this earthquake was centered just 8 miles, just about 12 kilometers north of Anchorage, the largest city in Alaska. And that's why there was so much damage. Now, fortunately, the pipeline was not severed. Airplanes could still land, but of course, as a temporary measure, they closed the airports. So the damage could have been a lot worse, and fortunately, it was not.
Fortunately, indeed. Can we expect any more aftershocks? And indeed, there was at some point a tsunami warning as well.
That's right. The tsunami warning has been canceled. In fact, tsunamis travel at the speed of a jet liner, several hundred miles per hour. And so any damage would have already taken place because of that tsunami. And so, yes, we expect aftershocks. We've had 3 so far. One of them was a 5.7, which in and of itself would qualify it as a major earthquake. So we expect aftershocks to keep on going for weeks and perhaps even months.
And what is it about that area which means that it's prone to earthquakes on a relatively regular basis? I don't know too much about the plates, but I'm sure you can explain.
Well, when you look at where we have monster earthquakes like a 9.2, we're talking about off the coast of Chile, Alaska, Japan, and on a map, you see that's the Pacific Ring of Fire. The Pacific Ring of Fire starts in Chile, goes up the coast of Mexico, up to the west coast of the United States, through Alaska, to Russia, Japan, and then into Indonesia. This is where most earthquakes are centered. And so it's not surprising that we had the 7.0 right in the Pacific Ring of Fire.
You talk about this Pacific Ring of Fire. Many people in California wonder how safe they are because there's obviously a lot of fear that California could get a big earthquake anytime soon.
Apparently, it's overdue. The San Francisco and the California earthquake, we think, are overdue. And we say this because we can actually calculate the frequency at which the San Andreas Fault shifts. So we're good enough now to understand the geology of the shifting of the San Andreas Fault, and we can calculate when earthquakes took place centuries ago. And we know, therefore, that we are in some sense overdue for another big one, like what happened in 1906 in California. And also, of course, we had one in Los Angeles as well. And so that means we have to be prepared. We have to make sure that building codes are up to speed, and we have to make sure that people know where to evacuate and what to do in the middle of a major earthquake.
Professor Kaku, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's happened again. A major company's been the victim of hackers, and now the personal information of customers may be in jeopardy. This time it's the Marriott hotel chain which has revealed as many as 500 million records in its Starwood chain were compromised. Well, for more on the hack and what consumers can do to protect themselves, we're joined now by Tom Kellerman, Chief Cyber Security Officer at Carbon Black. Great to have you with us, Tom. This isn't the first time we've reported on a major data breach. Why has this happened again?
Well, it happened again because Marriott was not conducting threat hunting exercises within their infrastructure, within Starwood's infrastructure, that would have allowed them to understand that a criminal conspiracy was ongoing. And
what is a threat hunting exercise?
It's essentially when you deploy an EDR tool to look across your infrastructure to see if an adversary or cyber criminal might already be active within your networks.
And who are these cyber criminals? Who are they looking out for? Because we see people hear from China, we hear from people that are domestic.
Sure.
I mean, what's the threat this time?
Yeah. Well, the majority of the dark web criminal community comes out of Eastern Europe. These are the most prolific cyber criminals out there, and they love to target major commercial entities for the purposes of pillaging consumer data, credit card data, debit card data, and conducting wire transfer frauds.
And so how can we stay one step ahead of these hackers?
I think most corporations need to recognize that security is a functionality of conducting business in this world, that the internet is not pacific, and they should all be conducting threat hunting exercises, particularly after they acquire another company, to understand if there's any points of presence where criminal activity may already be occurring. I mean, Carbon Black recently released a study that stated that 50% of the time you're seeing the supply chain of major commercial entities being targeted and used to hop into other commercial entities because of the implicit trust in that supply chain.
And what can we do ourselves to make sure that our data is safer and more protected?
Well, number one, we should expect far more from those who we do business with, and we should demand that they look at cybersecurity as a true functionality of conducting business. But for us as individuals, we need to use next-gen antivirus on our computers, on all computers, including Apple devices. We need to use sentences rather than passwords. We need to regularly update our operating systems and applications, and we need to stay far away from public Wi-Fi.
And is there more that law enforcement can do to crack down on these hackers as well?
Well, I feel for law enforcement. They're overwhelmed by caseload. There's less than 2% of computer crimes are actually successfully prosecuted, in large part because you have nation states like Russia that actually have created a protection racket around their very best cyber criminals. But that being said, law enforcement needs to do a better job of getting rid of the money, following the money. There's a lot of alternative payment systems and virtual currencies being used to facilitate the goods and services in the dark web economy. And if you could snuff that out and modernize money laundering laws and forfeiture laws, you could actually go after the root of the problem, which is the finances behind this economy of scale.
Tom Kellerman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
France's National Assembly has voted overwhelmingly in favour of a bill that would ban parents from smacking their children. The practice is already forbidden in more than 50 countries, including most of Europe, but campaigners say 85% of French parents resort to corporal punishment. The bill will now go to the Senate. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. The economic dream went bust for many in Brazil. People have voted for change, but can the new president deliver? Thousands of students in Australia have quit their classrooms to take part in a day of rallies to demand action on climate change, despite calls from the Prime Minister to stay in school. Hywell Griffith reports.
They may not have a vote, but they definitely have a voice. With placards, posters and plenty of one-liners, pupils walked out of schools and mobilised, organising protests in 27 towns and cities across the country. In Sydney, more than 1,000 rallied, demanding an end to all new coal and gas projects in Australia. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison warned his country's students to stay in school, but his comments seem only to have swelled the numbers and their anger. And they may be back. The students say unless they're taken seriously, this could be the first of many national strikes. Hywell Griffith, BBC News, Sydney.
Now, Now, as we've reported, leaders from the G20 nations are currently meeting in Buenos Aires, the first time the summit's ever been held in South America. It's been a big year in the region, with several countries holding presidential elections. Amongst them was Brazil, where populist Jair Bolsonaro was victorious. As part of our continuing series, the BBC's Katie Watson looks at the economic challenges he faces.
It's the economic engine of Latin America, the biggest city in the Western Hemisphere and one of the richest in the world. But the past few years have been difficult here in Sao Paulo and the country as a whole. Brazil's slowly coming out of its deepest ever recession. Unemployment remains stubbornly high. Every industry's felt the pain. Alcides has had a truck business for nearly 30 years. After more than 2 decades of growth, in 2014, crisis hit. Alcides had to make drastic job cuts. He blames the previous left-wing administrations of Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff. It's why he and many Brazilians concerned about the economy voted for far-right Jair Bolsonaro in the recent elections.
As decisões que o governo tomou no ambiente econômico e político.
The decisions that the government took under the Workers' Party were confused. The uncertainty, the lack of political credibility contaminated everyone. I'm sure things will change with this new government. The proposal of opening up the country, of more rational taxes, aligning Brazil with countries that look to the future. The principal reason to believe in this government is that there will be less state and more economy.
The financial sector wholeheartedly backed Mr. Bolsonaro. Stock markets were elated about his win. Or cynics would say merely relieved the Workers' Party wasn't returning to power. But not everyone's convinced.
We need to see results. Bolsonaro was the symbol of changing Brazilian economy and changing Brazilian society. If he not delivered that as fast as the Brazilians want, it's going to be very complicated for him and also for the Brazilian society.
What's getting some people nervous is Jair Bolsonaro's flip-flopping, announcing proposals, then going back at them, talking about big ideas but giving very little detail. He certainly painted himself as a man who'll bring change. He wants to shake up everything here in Brazil, but few people understand exactly how he'll go about it. For Nielsen, who works outside the stock exchange selling guavas, Bolsonaro represents hope. He's been here for 4 years after losing his job in construction.
Deus abençoar, né? Nós queremos, né?
God willing, things will get better next year, so we can exit this crisis, he tells me. Nielsen thinks Bolsonaro will be tougher and bring an end to corruption in politics once and for all. With Brazil's swing to the right, many feel the future of this huge and fragile democracy hangs in the balance. But economically, expectations are high. Katie Watson, BBC News in Sao Paulo.
These days, technology is rapidly changing around the world, and in Africa, it's helping to keep crops thriving. Using satellite data, British researchers have come up with a way to predict when swarms of insects could prove a major threat. It's hoped the early warning system will boost the yields of poor farmers and increase their incomes. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh sent us this report.
George Mwembe is a plant doctor. Today, he's making his fortnightly visit to the small town of Kimini in Kenya's Rift Valley province. He treats crops ravaged by pests. This farmer's maize has been infested by tiny caterpillars. With the help of an app, he identifies the species and recommends the right pesticide and other measures.
Due to the increased income in my farm, my kids now can go to better school because of the consistent income that I'm getting from the farm output. Also, livelihood in my farm home has improved because I can see I can meet the basic needs for my family.
A world away at a powerful supercomputer data centre in Oxfordshire, the UK Space Agency is trying to make life for Walter and other subsistence farmers even better. The plan is to use satellite data to develop a system that's able to predict pest infestations a week or more in advance. This map shows the land temperature, one of the major factors that drive infestations. The system combines that with weather and other local data. The Plant Doctor scheme has been incredibly successful. It's helped 18.3 million farmers all across the world. and on average their incomes and yields have increased by 13%. And it's hoped that the new predictive system could do even better, boosting that figure to maybe up to 20%.
Farmers are completely dependent on crops, the predictability of having a good yield to survive, but also to send their kids to school. And so if we can reduce the impact of pests, if we can enable them to get better yields, which is what we're already seeing, it will mean that they can help move out of poverty.
Farmers such as Lilian Wanyama now get alerts when the insects are coming and can take precautions before they arrive. The money she and others like her save and the extra food they produce will make a big difference to them and their communities. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
And remember, you can find more on all the day's news at our website, including the very latest on events at the G20 and that 7 magnitude earthquake in Alaska. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm at BBC Rajini V. I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. Thanks very much for watching us here at BBC World News America.